Gutierrez, and today we are addressing the heart of the matter, heart disease. Heart disease is currently the #2 cause of death in the country, so there's so many questions to answer here. We've invited on Dr. Milton Mills to bring some clarity to the subject, and you may have seen him in the documentary, What the Health, and other films, but we're elated to have him here in studio with us. Welcome back, Dr. Mills, but before we discuss what may be wrong with us, let's discuss what's right with you. How are you today? And what are some amazing things that you know and have seen about the amazing bodies that we have?
Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me back. It's always a delight to be here with you. And I am, again, doing great. I feel wonderful, and working with you here on this project has been an absolute delight. And another amazing fact about our bodies is the emerging understanding that we in the medical profession are gaining about the importance of our microbiome. One of the ways I try to help people understand just how important the microbiome and the colon are to our health is to talk about a concept I call meal retention time. And that refers to the amount of time a meal stays inside our body. I am referring to normal meal retention times because a normal meal retention time should be about 14 to 16 hours on average if you're eating a healthy, balanced, high-fiber, plant-based meal. Everyone should have at least one bowel movement every day. Actually, food spends hours or less in our stomach, and then it moves into the small intestine. So we'll say 3 hours. It passes through the entire length of the small intestine, which can be 30 to 35 feet in length, depending on the size of the person, in less than 2 hours, which is shocking to most people because when I first learned that from gastroenterologists, I was shocked. So we have a total of 5 hours out of 14 to 16 hours. So that means for the remainder of that 9 plus hours, the food is actually in our colon. And why is it spending all of that time there? Well, it's so that the bacteria that make up our microbiome have an opportunity to ferment and break down the plant fiber that's in the diet, can affect everything from our mood, whether or not we're depressed or anxious, to our body weight. Studies have shown that depending on the makeup of your microbiome, it may cause you to tend to be more obese or versus thin. It impacts cardiovascular health. It helps lower blood pressure. It certainly improves immune function and helps us ward off cancer. So the bottom line is a healthy microbiome will improve our health and help us obtain optimal health. It is by eating a varied, whole food, plant-based diet, because it's the fiber in the plant foods that the bacteria use for their metabolism and that they act on and break down and create these beneficial compounds. If we instead are eating foods that are high in animal protein, animal fat, dairy protein, that selects for an unhealthy microbiome, one that creates a lot of toxic compounds, and that will actually promote chronic disease versus overall health. Eat healthy, whole food, plant-based diet, and you will have a beautiful microbiome that will keep you in tip-top shape.
That's incredible. So fascinating. I never knew that so much of our digestive work happened in our colon. Doc, let's get to the heart of the matter.
Absolutely.
Heart disease. Globally, it trends as #1 for all causes of death.
Right.
What can you tell us to provide us an overview of why it's such a persistent challenge that we're facing?
So I want to start off by pointing something out. If you feed carnivores like dogs, cats, lions, tigers, a diet that is made up of huge amounts of saturated fat, cholesterol, animal protein, no matter how much fat and cholesterol you feed them, they will never develop heart disease. Never. And that is because their what's called lipoprotein metabolism, the way their liver and body handles fat and cholesterol, is designed to efficiently manage and get rid of all that fat and cholesterol, and it's never deposited in their arteries. The only way to make a dog, for instance, develop heart disease is to take out its thyroid so that its organs are no longer functioning normally. So then the question is, why is it that these carnivorous animals never develop heart disease, but we do when we eat the standard Western style diet? It's because, again, we really are plant eaters. The good news about that is that studies have shown that in people, Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, both showed that in people who had angiography demonstrated blockages in their arteries, I mean, we're talking bona fide heart disease, putting those people on a whole food, plant-based diet with no added oil caused those coronary blockages to regress in about 2 to 2.5 years. So where they had blocked arteries, those arteries opened up. In other words, the heart disease went away.
Wow. When you were here before in studio with us, you had talked about how plant-based diets was how we were biologically made. And listening to you now, it just reminded me of that previous conversation we had, and how that's just another way that you can see how it was biologically designed with that, which is really fascinating.
Yes.
Now, tell me a little bit about statistically, when we look at where heart disease trends have come in the last number of years, what can you share with us about what's pushing those numbers up?
Sure. I'm really glad you asked that question, because what's interesting is that if we look at causes of death in Western countries prior to modern industrialization and the widespread availability of animal foods, they were very different from what we see now. In the late 1800s, around the turn of the beginning of the 20th century, the leading causes of death were actually infectious diseases, accidents, perinatal mortality in women, but things like heart disease and cancers actually accounted for a very small percentage of the deaths. But as these countries industrialized, brought in farming methods that allowed them to raise large numbers of animals for consumption, and then efficiently ship those animals to various places in the country, such that individuals were able to start including more animal food in their diet on a regular basis. World War II, when refrigeration became widespread and people, instead of having ice boxes in their home, had actual refrigerators where they could go out, buy big pieces of animal tissue or lots of dairy products, and then keep them from spoiling. In the late 1800s, the majority of people were actually living a primarily agrarian existence and eating a primarily plant-based diet because nobody could afford meat. And it wasn't widely available, it wasn't cheap, and you couldn't keep lots of meat in your house because it would rot. The best a person could do was to have an ice box, which was literally a box with a big piece of ice in the bottom. It didn't refrigerate food, it only kept it cool. So it was really a question of, you can't keep these animal foods around your house because they will spoil and be inedible. So again, after the introduction of electricity that was available to almost every household, and then refrigerators that could actually keep animal foods from spoiling, and again, we saw the rise in heart disease. And just as an interesting little anecdote within that, during World War II, as the Nazis spread throughout Europe, when they would invade a country, they began taking all of the meat and dairy for themselves and their invading armies, which forced the population, like in Holland and in Finland and some of these other countries, to revert to a primarily plant-based diet. And what you see is that the rates of cardiovascular disease plummet during World War II, when nobody could get these animal foods, but as soon as the war ended and the consumption of the animal foods started to increase, again, the rates of heart disease and cancers and other problems, again, skyrocketed. So there's no question that this is directly related to the fact that we have moved towards this heavy consumption of animal foods that our bodies are not designed to handle and that create disease as a result.
Wow. It's crazy to hear that statistic about what happened during World War II and seeing that direct linkage to that.
Absolutely.
In right now and in your previous talks, you've talked about this link between heart disease and what we eat, what we feed ourselves with. What do you find is a surprising fact, maybe a little known fact about this?
I guess what surprises me is that more people aren't aware of that linkage. As a critical care doctor would often do is that if I'm in a hospital, I get called down to the emergency room to see someone who's presenting with an acute heart attack. They're in the throes of actually having a heart attack. I will ask them, what did you last eat and when did you eat it? And invariably, it would always be a very high-fat meal. Oh, I went out with my wife to a steakhouse. We had this big, dinner of, porterhouse steak with some baked potato and whipped cream and some very heavy dessert about 6 hours before the symptoms began. And that's because that's the time period that it takes for the food to get through the stomach, into the small intestine, absorbed into the bloodstream, and then goes and causes the areas in the heart that are already narrowed to form these blockages and cause the actual heart attack.
So if someone has been having a diet that's created, or lifestyle, whatever, that's created those narrow arteries, what you're telling us is that then if you go out and have a very rich meal that's high in fat, that's when that pushes it over the line.
That can push you right over the edge because it makes your blood hypercoagulable. So it makes it more likely that you will form an actual complete blockage at the site of that narrowing and bring on the symptoms of a heart attack. Well, think about when you're watering your grass and you put your thumb over the opening to the nozzle. What happens? The water speeds up. It shoots out with more force. The same thing happens as blood is flowing down an artery and it meets an area of narrowing. It starts to speed up across that blockage, and that creates shear forces on that blockage, which will often peel off the top layer of covering, exposing that collection of fat, cholesterol to the bloodstream, which treats it just the way your body would treat it if I scraped off a piece of your skin. It's a wound, and blood will accumulate, and then it will coagulate to try and stop the bleeding. Same thing happens at the narrowing, but if you've got, only this much space, and all of a sudden you form a big clot there, that's what causes the complete cessation of blood flow, precipitating the heart attack. Sometimes people can form blockages in an area in a coronary artery that supplies so much of the heart muscle that when it's blocked, the heart muscle can't function anymore. It's like getting if I cut off the blood flow to your leg, you wouldn't be able to walk because the muscles wouldn't be able to function. If that blockage is at a point in the artery where most of the cardiac muscle can't receive oxygen and nutrition, the heart will stop pumping. If that were to happen, the person would typically pass out, become unresponsive. They may even have some seizure-like activity as the brain sort of discharges electrically because it's no longer receiving nourishment. And people will clearly recognize, oh my goodness, this person is having a problem, and they will call 911. You can't wait for 911. Every person, every family should have someone in that family that knows basic life support, BLS, because what you have to do while you're waiting on the emergency responders to arrive, if you check and there's no pulse, please start immediate CPR so that you can restore blood flow to the brain to keep the brain alive until the emergency medical technicians get there and they can do a more thorough job. please don't just wait for EMS. Start CPR immediately and take that BLS course so you know how to do effective CPR. There was this one gentleman I was responsible for who was back for the third time in 5 years to get another stent. And when I walked in to see him, he was clearly just depressed. And talking with him, he was scared that he was going to die. He's like, why doesn't this work? You know, I've been back for stent after stent and it keeps happening. And what I explained to him was, while, you know, stents, which are the little wire cages that they put in to open a blocked artery, can restore blood flow to a place in the heart that's not receiving it, it doesn't do anything about the process of forming those blockages. And so what I explained to him was that the disease is still ongoing. The disease is the deposition of fat and cholesterol in your arteries. And the only way to change that is to change your diet and lifestyle. If you leave here and you go out and you keep eating the same foods and diet that caused that blockage to form in the first place, you're going to get another one. And the next time you may not be lucky enough to get to the hospital in time enough to get the artery open. So you have to understand that our modern techniques are very good at restoring blood flow, helping to prevent someone from dying from an acute heart attack, but it does not address the underlying disease. The only thing that will do that effectively is to change your diet to a diet that no longer causes these blockages to form. And the best diet for that, without question, whole food, plant-based diet, no added oil. That is what will keep you alive, healthy, and interacting with your family and future generations.
Thank you for sharing those tips. I know we've just touched the iceberg of this topic. We're going to switch and hear from some of our callers. Some questions they might have may not be about heart disease, but we're going to hear what they're wanting to ask you today.
It's from Justine. My husband has just had a heart attack and is now stable, but there's potential need for surgery. Is it possible that lifestyle change can help us to avoid surgery?
So the answer to that question is yes, Justine, but you can't play around. You can't say, oh, I'm going to make incremental changes, or I'm going to make a small change here and there. Your husband has severe heart disease. If they're talking about surgery, likely they're talking about a bypass operation. And that means that he's felt to be at a point where he could potentially have another heart attack from closure of an already partially blocked artery. And if you really are serious about using lifestyle changes to treat that, again, Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Ornish, and I encourage you to Google both those physicians, and the research that they've done have shown that immediately changing to a whole food, plant-based, no added oil diet will stabilize the blockages help stabilize the blockages that are there, and prevent them from continuing to grow or to close off. It'll keep your blood from being hypercoagulable, again, which makes it less likely that those blockages will close off. And if you adhere to that diet, as I mentioned before, those blockages can and will regress. And Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who was a leading actual surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, has written a book called Diet Changes to Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And I encourage everyone to get that book. And he shows you picture after picture of individuals who had blockages and reverse them purely with diet and lifestyle change. But again, you've got to be serious, you've got to be consistent, and no cheating.
This is from Tyrone. I just want to know what profession or even form of exercise will give me the strongest heart.
Oh, that's a fascinating question, because what, again, is very clear from research observation is that the human body was made to move. And if we, and as we've industrialized and created all of these labor-saving devices, I sometimes tell people, all we've done, if we want to be healthy, is move the physical labor from the job to the gym. Because the fact is, in order to be healthy, we have to continually move. So certainly, being a laborer where you're physically active, construction worker, farmer, something like that, where you are physically moving and using your body to perform exercise for the majority of the day will keep you healthy. So we simply have to make sure that we are consistently doing both aerobic and anaerobic or resistance type exercise throughout the week to keep ourselves healthy. So you want to have 30 to 40 minutes of aerobic type exercise where you get your heart rate up to at least 70% of its maximum capacity for 30 to 40 minutes. Do that 3 to 4 times a week, but also supplement that with resistance training, where you're doing weightlifting or some form of resistance training that are forcing the muscles in your body to exercise and expend energy and move. We just have to figure out how to incorporate physical exercise into our life on a daily basis to keep us healthy.
I understand that you've worked with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Can you tell us a little bit about how federal nutrition policies might be fueling heart disease rates?
Sure. And that's a wonderful question because it's an important one. Prior to working with PCRM, I was under the impression that the dietary guidelines for Americans were put out by the Department of Health and Human Services, which kind of makes sense. That's the government agency that's supposed to promote overall health for Americans. But it turns out our dietary guidelines are put out by the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And they actually have as their primary goal, or certainly the USDA's primary goal, is to increase the market for U.S. agricultural output. So it's not concerned with your health, it's concerned with moving more agricultural product. And so from its very inception, when the dietary guidelines were first created, the advisory committee was made up of a combination of physicians and medical researchers, but also industry operatives. And there was this immediate tension between what the research showed people should be eating, which was less animal food, less dairy or no dairy, and more, again, whole plant foods, and less fat, sugar, salt, and so on. You had this inherent conflict. And the guidelines that we have gotten across the years have always been a compromise between what industry wants and what the research shows. And unfortunately, because money talks in our system of government, and in the United States, for instance, they still recommend dairy, whereas fortunately, you progressive and forward-thinking Canadians have removed dairy foods as a recommended so-called food group, because there really is no reason for human beings to be drinking the milk of another species. So there is absolutely no reason to be encouraging people to eat them. But beyond that, we need to encourage people to switch from a animal food focused diet to one that is built around whole plant foods. And that is what will markedly reduce their disease risk.
It's amazing hearing that, because I think it really showcases how, as individual consumers, we need to do our own research.
Absolutely.
We can't just trust what's put out there because we don't know what all the sources might be.
That is absolutely true.
Chronic inflammation is a hidden culprit. Can you share a fascinating link between inflammation and heart disease, and how plants can actually act like a natural anti-inflammatory shield?
Sure. So as you pointed out, the inflammatory environment in the body will accelerate all disease processes. Inflammation makes all of those things worse. It accelerates the deposition of the fat and cholesterol. It makes molecules more sticky, so they're more likely to glom on together and form these blockages and then grow at a faster rate. The good news, as you alluded to, is plant foods are filled with antioxidants and what we call phytochemicals or plant chemicals that have an anti-inflammatory effect on our system, so that they lower the overall rate of inflammation in the body and will therefore decelerate and even help reverse heart disease, as I mentioned previously. And I've seen this time and time again. So again, a whole foods, healthy, plant-based diet will lower inflammation and make you more resistant to the effects of inflammatory compounds, but both an animal food diet, but also a diet that is high in processed, highly processed foods, that is high in sugar, high in salt, will also exacerbate inflammation. So you want to eliminate salt, sugar, animal foods from your diet.
It's Jerry. I'm wondering about ED and heart disease. If I'm experiencing some issues with ED, could that be connected to heart disease in some way?
And the answer to that question is without question, because erectile dysfunction is often considered at the so-called canary in the coal mine with respect to heart disease. Well, why is that? Well, we've just talked about the fact that heart disease is where you start to form blockages in the arteries of the heart that lead to narrowing that could ultimately cause a heart attack. Well, the arteries that supply the penis are actually smaller than those in the heart. So if you're forming blockages throughout your cardiovascular system, it will affect the smaller arteries first before you notice it in the larger arteries. So that's telling you that if you are having problems with getting or maintaining erection, you likely have blockages in the artery supplying your penis, and that absolutely means you also have blockages in the artery supplying your heart. So yes, it is a warning sign, and should tell you that you really, one, need a thorough evaluation, but more importantly, you need to change your diet so that you can stop these blockages from worsening and help them to start to regress. And again, there's a very good movie that came out a few years ago called Game Changers, where they discuss that whole issue of erectile dysfunction and heart disease.
Incredible. That's very hopeful. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this week's episode of Ask the Doctor, please join us for the next episode, as these conversations are just getting started. We'd love to have you back here. If you have a question you'd like to submit, please send it to askthedoctor@3abn.ca. You can leave a message there and we will include it in our next episode. Thanks for watching.